Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare related matter to escape whatever's happening in your everyday life. Now, today, I have another postcard, so we'll have to find another slot for a postcard. This one's from Gus Walker. Thank you, Gus. He's actually asked me two questions, so this will be two episodes worth of Ancient Warfare Answers. You, of course, can send us a postcard too, evidence. The address is P.O. Box 222, Belfield, Belfield, NSW 2191, Australia. That will get to me. Now, Gus says, "Hi, Murray. Hope you are going well. Decided to post rather than ask my question in person." He's coming in person. That's dedicated Ancient Warfare Answer fandom there. Right. First question is the Thureophoroi. What were they? Light troops, peltast replacements, and where did they originate? Question two, which we'll cover next time as well. Classical Greece. What was the difference between bronze and iron weapons and armor in terms of availability, hardness, temper, and penetrating ability? So, thank you, Gus. Yeah, of course, you can ask a question. You don't have to come and visit me in person in Sydney or send a postcard. You can send us an email. You can back us on Patreon. You can ask a question, even if you don't back us on Patreon. But why wouldn't you? You can back us at one of three levels: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. $1, $5, $10. That will get you even a copy of the magazine if you wish. That is, of course, Ancient Warfare magazine, where this all started. Right, so let's deal with the Thureophoroi, which is named after the shield they carry, the Thureos. Now, interestingly, the Thureos shield is an oval shield, which seems to appear in Hellenistic Greek armies in the 3rd century BC. That's really interesting because, of course, we know from Celtic archaeology that the Gallic and Celtic shields prior to that date were also oval in shape. And whereas the pelta of the Macedonian and Hellenistic phalangites and the aspis and aspides of the Greek hoplites, and then the Magna Graeca hoplites in Italy and then the Italian hoplites, if we still agree with that idea, were round. And so the idea, of course, of an oval shield influencing warfare is a fascinating one because, of course, the most famous oval shield is the Roman legionary oval shield of the Republican era. And interestingly, after the rectangular legionary shield of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the oval shield comes back into prominence and, dominance even. So it's a really interesting question about the sort of origins of it. Interestingly, we've got the idea, of course, that you've got the Thureos oval shield, which has a central boss in the middle of the shield and a spine to make it stronger. The strange thing, of course, about that is, according to different evidence, does Pyrrhus of Epirus see those in the Roman legionaries he fights in the early 3rd century and then adopt them himself? That's one option. That would see the Romans adopting the oval shield of the Celts, the Gauls, after 390 at the Battle of Allia, for instance. The other idea, of course, is that, as the latest issue of the magazine has just explored, there's a Gallic invasion of Greece in 279, and it could be that point where the Greek powers that be decide that they like this new shield design. So both are possible. The archaeology and the literature doesn't really help us differentiate between the two. And so it's possible that both were or had a role to play. It doesn't quite work that Pyrrhus might have had them already when he invades Italy, and therefore the Romans adopt them from him. And so the idea that he adopts them from the Romans might also be a literary problem in the sense that the literature that tells us that is much, much later, as is the literature that tells us that Philopoemen, for instance, adopts the oval Thureos shield for his phalangites later. So that's Plutarch. So it's an issue. Polybius does mention them as well. So, most of the literature is later, Polybius being the earliest, writing in the 160s about things that were happening the previous century. So the idea, of course, is that you have an infantryman armed with a oval shield rather than a round one. They are armed with spears, not sarissa, not sarissai, long pikes, but they also have javelins and a sword. They're more heavily armored than light armored peltasts. So they are lighter. If we were using modern ideas, they are medium infantry. If you were a wargamer, medium infantry, light infantry, heavy infantry, medium infantry, right in the middle there. But that isn't a term that the ancients would have used. The idea, of course, is that they are able to operate as missile troops. They're lighter armed and armored than the heavy phalangite infantry. They have javelins. They also have swords and armor to protect themselves and shields. And then they can rearm themselves and become spearmen, so they can become heavier if required. So they're not light infantry or skirmishers or missile troops, nor are they the heavy phalanx, which remains in the Hellenistic armies right through until their defeat at the Battle of Pydna or kind of Scephalai and Pydna. So it seems like they are a sort of an infantryman who is adaptable and flexible, much like the later Roman legionary, who can perform light roles and heavier roles. Of course, one of the other things that's important for Macedonian and Hellenistic phalanxes is guarding the flank of the phalanx, and they seem to be able to do that too. One of the things we're told by Plutarch in his Life of Philopoemen, who of course is a general of the Achaean League at the beginning of the 2nd century BC, is that they were tactically flexible and they were mobile, could advance over difficult terrain, which of course is one of the dangers for the phalangites, that they can't do that, such as at the Battle of Pydna, where they are defeated because of the terrain. And so therefore they can fight as both skirmishers and fall back and assume a heavier role or a more defensive role. So they've got that flexibility within their design, and it would seem that the oval shield is part of that it's not as heavy as around Aspides, not as I don't want to say the word cumbersome, but I can't think of another word for it. They're not as unwieldy. Also doesn't help me. They're less unwieldy, oh dear, than a bigger shield, but still offering protection, perhaps allowing men to be closer together in a close shield form. So we've got that as well. So that seems to be where their function and their development is in that period post-Greek invasion, post-Gallic invasion, Celtic and Gallic invasion of Greece, post-Roman campaigns of Pyrrhus of Epirus. It's not quite sure which one is where they come from. It could be a combination of both. That's sort of sitting on the fence a little bit, I suppose. We're quite lucky that we have quite a few tombstones of these types of troops to show us what they look like and how they're equipped and how they spread throughout the Hellenistic kingdom. So they certainly seem to have been a good idea and are quickly adapted and adopted by the Hellenistic kings. Now, the other interesting one, of course, is that we have another term, which is the Thureophoroi, who seem to also be the Thureophoroi, or very similar to them, even though they have a different name. And we do have them again referred to by both Polybius and Plutarch. There might be a differentiation between a Thureophoroi being more heavily armored than a Thureophoros. And the Thureophoros might be having the shield and this idea that they can throw javelins and then become more heavy spearmen, whereas the Thureophoroi might be wearing a mail shirt from thorax, and linothorax is the sort of idea of armor that we get in ancient Greek sources. So there's all sorts of ideas going on with those two things. They are very much a 3rd century BC kind of development, and they're never the major part of a Macedonian army. Philopoemen adopts them, but there are others, of course, who are still using the round-shielded Hellenistic phalanx right through until the end of the phalanx at Pydna in 168 BC. So there are another troop type that has this function that they can be both light troops and heavier troops, guard the flank of the phalanx, which in Alexander's time is the role of the peltasts and also the role of the Agrianians, for instance, and other troops. So it's sort of that. Some people have seen these troops as the ultimate development of the light infantry, that they're not heavy, but they're not light anymore. They're sort of able to operate as multiple troop types. Having said that, of course, in all of those armies, you have both the Thureophoroi or the Thureophoroi and peltasts. So as a development, it doesn't quite work because the presence in those armies of lighter armed troops is still there. You've still got slingers, you've still got archers, you've still got peltasts, and then you have this addition of a new type of infantry who can do both roles. So it's one of those. I don't believe, and I wonder whether there are many adherents to it, is that the idea is that it's a Roman influence, that Pyrrhus sees these in action from Rome, brings them back to Greece, and it's a Roman influence. I think there's too much contact at the time with the Celtic, Gallic world who defeat the Greeks to show them, hey, look, our oval shields are a fabulous way of fighting. So I don't think you can credit it as a Roman influence on the Greek military, but there are people who do believe that. So I think it's the other way around. I think it's a Celtic influence on both Roman and Greek warfare that leads to this thing that looks very similar. So I hope that has answered your first question, Gus, and I will answer your next one next time, and then hopefully I'll see you in person and you might ask me another. That would be fantastic. All right, join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.